Committee, before we get started this morning, we've got an RS that we're going to address. And then to let you know on House Joint Memorial 1, what our intent to do today is we will take as Representative Scott will have 5 minutes to open, and then we will take as much public testimony as we possibly can today, and then I'll cut public testimony off at 10:45. Allow Representative Scott to close up. She'll have 5 minutes to close up, and then we will start our motions, but we will take action on House Joint Memorial 1 today. So with that, Representative Tanner, RS 32005. Welcome to House State Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Like the good chairman stated, you have before you RS 32005, and this is a resolution. This resolution deals with Dr. Fauci and his pardon for his federal crimes. And this is actually stating that there is a separation of jurisdiction when it comes to federal and state crimes. And we want to make sure that Dr. Fauci actually knows that. Hopefully he does, but it does state that former President Joe Biden preemptive federal pardon for Dr. Fauci does not inspire confidence in Dr. Fauci's conduct or trust in the move that he had pushed forward, the Trust the Science movement. It also states that the federal pardon granted to Dr. Fauci does not affect legal proceedings, investigations, and potential prosecution for state crimes under the authority of state government. Just a little bit to go backwards in time, because this one came, and what the pardon actually came out to be was from 2014 forward. And why 2014 is what we saw happen in the release of gain of function that was actually being done in Wuhan, China. Again, why President Trump said China. Where did the virus come from? China. And it was because that's where it came from. And leaked emails that actually came from Dr. Fauci recognized that it came from that lab. But beyond that, he went ahead and even knowing where it came from, he pushed mask mandates. He pushed mass deceptions. He pushed lockdowns. And from an Idaho sense, that meant shutting down businesses. That meant putting mass panic into the people of Idaho of not knowing what's going on, what to actually trust. He suppressed life-saving drugs that showed great effectiveness within treating the virus and preventing severe illness. In my opinion, what he had done was cause people's lives in Idaho. And this pardon that was granted to him does not inspire confidence, one, to the people of Idaho, but I do want the people of Idaho to know, and this is what this is about, that just because he received this federal pardon does not mean that he cannot be prosecuted with Idaho with the crimes that he committed here. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Tanner. Are there questions for Representative Tanner? Representative Skog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Tanner, do you have any reason to suspect that there is some kind of criminal investigation going on now in the state of Idaho on Dr. Fauci?
Representative Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Skog, as of yet, I have not seen any come forward. One thing that I would point out with that is a lot of people will try to get the Attorney General to want to go after it. That does take legislative action from this body if that's something that we would want to go from. But it does, right on how Idaho works jurisdictionally, it is actually going to be the counties that would actually be able to have the most say and be able to take up those criminal cases easiest.
Follow up.
Yes, for a motion. I expect there's further discussion because of my motion, but I'd move to introduce RS 32005 and send it to the second reading calendar with a due pass recommendation.
Committee, we have a motion to introduce and send to the second reading calendar RS 32005. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It will be done. Would you like to be recorded as voting no? Representative Achilles on the record voting no, and Representative Morley on the record voting no. Thank you. Committee will now consideration House Joint Memorial 1. Representative Scott.
Good morning, Chairman Crane and committee. I'm Representative Heather Scott, District 2, And before I get started, I want to clear up just a little bit of misunderstanding about what we're presenting today. This memorial today in front of you is about upholding federalism and a state's rights to make our own decisions. It is not about defining marriage. It's about who should be defining marriage. Should it be the state or should it be the federal government? Everyone's entitled to their own viewpoint on marriage. What we're encouraging is that these discussions happen within the state, with our local people, instead of through the federal government. So a little bit of background. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a 5-4 decision in Obergefell versus Hodges, and it legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, which effectively nullified any marriage laws in the states. That affected the entire country. The dissenting 4 Supreme Court justices all argued that the court had exceeded its constitutional authority. They'd undermined state sovereignty and they disrupted the democratic process. Remember, this is the same process that states use to deal with issues on gun rights, wolf hunting, legalizing marijuana. These are state decisions. So while the justices didn't agree on every point of their dissent, they did agree on the federalism issue, that this took authority away from the states. They all agreed that this was judicial activism, which said that the court has overstepped its rule. And they also believe that this disenfranchised voters, because these are decisions made in the states. The central argument in my resolution today is fundamentally why it's important to overturn this is because it's when we have federal overreach like this, it further erodes our states' rights. And we do have the authority as a state to take up issues that are not clearly defined in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution reserves powers not delegated to the federal government to the states and the people. And that's what we're talking about today. So for the Obergefell case, what I'm asking you to do to kind of keep in mind that we're dealing with states' rights issue is swapping out the word marriage or the case on marriage with any other strongly held idea that you have. So kind of hypothetically, what if the federal government defined property rights or nationalized water rights? What would that do to Idaho citizens? What if they had a federal fair use standard that people could come on to and off of your property? Would we want to have a decision in that as Idaho citizens? What if the federal government or the judiciary ruled that there's a new energy policy that they wanted to impose on states? And they decided that hydroelectrical dams were bad for the environment, and they wanted us to remove all our dams. These are decisions that were specifically left up to the states to decide, and that's why it's so important that we protect our federalism in this issue. So I could go through every whereas, if you'd like, but I'm guessing there might be some questions on specifics. So in order to save some time, I'll just highlight a few in the document. So the first one, the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States in the Obergefell Hodges is at odds with the Constitution of the United States and the principles upon which the United States is established. I mean, that's really the heart of what we're doing. Whereas liberty has long been understood as individual freedom from government action, not a right for the government to give or take. If you go to line, let's go to line 28. This is a threat to religious liberty. The state of Idaho has made decisions on our marriage laws. Now, if we want to change those decisions, we run constitutional amendments or we pass state law, and we have those conversations in the state. So I'm not going to go through each one of these just in order to save time when I realized I only have 5 minutes and
Thank you, Representative Scott.
15
Yeah, I
pages.
was going to let you know you got about 60 seconds left.
Oh, great. Okay, so the main things that we're asking for in this is to reject Obergefell. We formally reject this ruling. We're calling for a reversal of the ruling. We're calling for the Supreme Court to restore our state authority, and then we're asking our chief clerk to send a resolution to the Supreme Court in hopes that they will take up a case that will address this issue. Just like Roe versus Wade, that was a state's rights, that the Supreme Court decided that they were going to turn abortion into a right that wasn't their authority to do. They're doing the same thing with marriage. And this needs to be a decision made in each state, and that's what this resolution is all about. So with that, I'll end and ask for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Scott. Representative Keeley's.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Representative Scott. So this committee received a letter from a former Idaho Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice. It's in our packets that this memorial will not be read or considered by the courts. So I'm just struggling with what problem we're trying to solve here if this memorial is really just going to be ignored by the courts.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles. So, the Supreme Court has the ability to cherry pick whatever cases they want to hear. By sending a strong statement for Idaho that we believe that this is not their authority to define any type of thing that's not in their jurisdiction to do, it could encourage them to pull up a case, just like they pulled up Roe versus Wade. So we're sending a clear message from Idaho is we don't want our laws and our Constitution trampled on. And it should be our decision what we want to do in a state.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Scott, I think my concern with the argument around states' rights is the history associated with it. So, the Confederate States made similar states' rights claims to perpetuate slavery. During the Jim Crow era, segregation was justified based on states' rights. And as a nation, we addressed those discriminatory state laws in the wake of the Civil War with the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment created this concept of federal fundamental rights that states could not abridge. So my concern in doing this, and clearly we're targeting Obergefell for a number of reasons here, but where do we draw the line? If we can justify in Idaho that we can discriminate against a same-sex couple, then who else is open to discrimination? How do we draw the line between a legitimate and illegitimate marriage in the state? Thank you.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Achilles. I don't think anyone in Idaho is discriminating against anyone. The 14th Amendment is not about creating new rights that are not found in the Constitution. And that's where you can't just pull out, determine rights. Rights are unalienable and they come from God and they don't come from government. So if we start down this road where the federal government or the judiciary decides that they're going to create rights for us, then they can take rights away. And so that's where I think we draw the line.
Any further questions for Representative Scott? Representative Morley.
Mr. Chairman, a question?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Representative Scott, I'd actually like to ask you a question on one of the sections you read. Sorry. Okay, thank you. On line 10, where it says, whereas liberty has long been understood as individual freedom from government action, not as a right to a particular governmental entitlement. Obergefell protects the fundamental rights of consenting adults without government interference. Overturning it would allow state governments to interfere in those very personal decisions. How does overturning Obergefell protect individual freedom from government action, as this line claims? Doesn't this memorial contradict its own stated principle of liberty?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Morley. Liberty traditionally means freedom from government interference, and so this expanded definition of liberty, they're defining rights, and that's not liberty. So,
Any follow-up?
Follow-up, yes.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So,
Oh, it is on, yeah. I guess so, why is
You
it?
pulled your mic just a
Oh,
little bit
sorry,
closer. And the
thank
only
you.
reason, Representative, this is broadcast out across
Okay.
the state, so maybe you
Thank
have
you.
people in Sandpoint or in Pocatello that want to hear your question.
Okay, thank you. I guess so why is it okay for state government to interfere in some marriages but not others?
Representative Scott.
thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Morley. I don't know that we're talking about the state interfering with marriages. I mean, marriage is not a right given by the federal government, and that's what's at the heart of this. Does that answer? I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're saying.
Do you want to try to rephrase your
Follow-up.
question? Okay,
Yeah.
certainly.
Representative Scott, I do agree that states can regulate marriage, but marriage is a fundamental right. How is it not state government overreach to restrict some types of marriages? Isn't that violating equal protection under the 14th Amendment?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Morley, I don't think marriage is a fundamental right.
Representative Keeley's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott, just going back to the memorial, starting on line 21, I had trouble understanding this section here. So it reads, whereas Obergefell undermines this vision by declaring that citizens must seek dignity from the state. Could you help me understand that one?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Achilles. So Obergefell is like tying dignity to the state validation of your personal relationships. And that's what I mean by that.
I could see the wheels spinning over there, and I was sensing another question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a follow up. So Representative Scott, I think we're getting at the crux of the issue here, which is we don't think the state should be restricting marriage, or the state should not be in the business of overseeing marriage. But in our current Constitution, we have, I think, a legitimate argument to say that the restriction of marriage being between one man and one woman is that sort of government overreach. So if we take a step back and we say that marriage is something that the state should not be involved in, that's precisely what Obergefell is trying to do. Obergefell is trying to give individuals, regardless of where they live, the right to marry as they see fit, whereas we've engaged in a problem here in the state of Idaho where we're restricting that right to marriage as someone sees fit.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Achilles. Dignity is inherent, and it shouldn't be based on the state's decision. So I don't know that we're going to come to agreement on this exactly, or I'm not sure I totally understand what you're saying.
Any further questions for Representative Scott? Representative, I've got a question for you, headed along the line where Representative Achilles, he was talking about states restricting marriage, but if yours were to pass and the Supreme Court took it up and the Supreme Court says, hey, just like Roe, we're going to turn this back to the states to decide, could not progressive states expand? In other words, could they not expand their definition of marriage, that it's not just between a man and a woman or between two gay individuals, but also that marriage could be between three individuals if they want?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That has been some criticism of the Obergefell decision, is that it could lead to polygamy and other decisions. And to respond to kind of, for both of the questions together, these are state decisions, these are state conversations, and what this resolution is saying is these decisions need to be made in the state, not by the federal government or judges and the federal judiciary.
Okay. Representative Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott, I wanted to ask you, overturning Obergefell will raise questions about other landmark cases, you were alluding to this, built on some constitutional, the same constitutional principles of due process and equal protection. You may disagree with the merits of Obergefell, but do you agree we should protect interracial marriage, which was protected by Loving in 1967? Privacy in the home, I know that's important to us in Idaho. I don't want anybody peering in my home. Protected by Griswold in 1965, or should this memorial include Loving, Griswold, and Obergefell?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Morley, this resolution, you could go and study a bunch of cases, but is very specific here that this, especially with the 4-5 dissension in this ruling and what the justices said, this is outrageous what they've done in this case. It's probably the most timely. I don't know what you're referring to, what cases, but I think the courts have been a little bit out of control. We've seen this with the reversal of Roe versus Wade, and I think they're out of bounds. And so we can have all those discussions on, parental rights or whatever other cases you're talking about. It needs to be done at the state with the people in a hearing like this where we can actually hear testimony and make decisions as a state which way we want to go.
Representative Morley.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how is regulating interracial marriage different than regulating same-sex marriage?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Morley, I'm not sure that we're talking about regulating any marriage here. We're talking about a state's decision to do what it wants in its state without the federal government interfering. This comes back to states' rights to make our own decisions, and we could get into discussions on where we think on these topics all day long, but that's not what this is about.
Follow up. Okay. Representative Keeley's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott. So at the time Obergefell was decided in 2015, same-sex marriage was already legal, in Idaho because of the case filed Lotta versus Otter. So do you have a legal opinion or perhaps one from the Attorney General answering whether the ruling from Lotta would still stand if Obergefell was overturned?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Achilles, I do not, but I do know there is an order to law. I'm not a lawyer, but the Constitution trumps state law, and when the federal government is out of bounds to not something that's not one of their delegated jobs to do, that's a state's decision. So I can't answer what that looks like in our state, but I know the conversation should be here. The same way the conversation on property rights or those other examples I gave, those are all state decisions. It's not the federal government's job to figure out what's going on in Idaho.
Certainly.
Follow, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So, Representative Scott, and I think I agree with you that there's a rich discussion we can have around states' rights and all these issues and the friction between the state and federal government. But if we go back to your point that the Constitution, the federal Constitution trumps the state Constitution, then we're in fact going back to those core amendments, and the 14th Amendment in particular, that underpins this decision. So, it sounds like that if we agree that we're leading with the federal Constitution, then this really shouldn't be a topic of conversation.
Do you want to respond?
Just that I disagree, and that's why I'm bringing it.
That's exactly why we have this process. Okay. Would you like the question? Certainly.
One more, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. So, Representative Scott, I think a question here on just the financial impacts of Obergefell. So if Obergefell is overturned, same-sex couples will be denied the rights of heterosexual couples. Heterosexual couples enjoy, the Social Security benefits, spousal Social Security benefits. They enjoy VA benefits, filing their state and federal income tax as a married couple, being able to make medical decisions for their spouse, putting two names on the deed of the house. And in fact, when you look at the list, there's over 1,300 rights and benefits that couples receive from being married. So if we decide that same-sex couples don't have the right to be married, then they have to go through extra work, effectively hiring an attorney at tens of thousands of dollars to codify those or to create those same rights. So by seeking to overturn Obergefell, we're effectively putting a tax on same-sex couples that opposite-sex couples don't have. And that just seems contrary to how we look at the conservatism that we have in the state towards taxes.
So it's a great statement that you're making there, but could you frame it in the form of a question so that she can respond? Because you're making some good statements, but they need to be questions.
Mr. Chairman, the
specifically
question is,
to the.
All right, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I'll be more clear on my question. Apologies. So,
No problem.
Representative Scott, by seeking to overturn Obergefell, we're layering a tax on same-sex couples, and I am concerned, and I think we should all be concerned on putting an incremental tax on same-sex couples. And so, how do we justify that tax with this memorial?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Achilles, I love all your arguments, and those should be arguments that we have at the state level. When you've discussed with me bringing a constitutional change, those are conversations we have in committee. We have testimony from people. This top-down approach to defining rights, any right that the federal government decides they want to come up with, is a problem to me, and that's why I'm asking to be relooked at. Because like I said, what happens when they say we have a new policy, dams are bad for the country, and it's a right that people are protected? We're going to pull out all the dams in Idaho. How does Idaho get to participate in that? Because that's why the Constitution's set up. So there's an order and there's a way that states and the individual person is represented. With all those arguments you just gave, I mean, you would use those to convince a committee that this is what we need to do in our state, and this is how we need to protect what you want protected. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And this is just a request that they take it up. Like I said, they cherry pick whatever ones they want to take up, and they have their reasonings for that. This is just saying we as a state would like them to take up the Obergefell because we do not like them telling us how we define marriage, how we any of our marriage laws, and what that could lead to or not lead to. That's a state's decision.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we're going to move on to public testimony then. First up today will be Sue Latta. Sue, state your name, who you represent. You'll have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Sue Latta. I represent myself and my wife. All right. I am submitting this on behalf of myself and my wife in the strongest opposition to this memorial. Tracy and I have been together for over 21 years. We own 2 businesses here in Boise. We own a home. We are proud parents and grandparents, and we love our life here. In the early 2000s, as some states began allowing same-sex marriage, we started to understand the profound ways legal marriage could protect us and our families. It wasn't just about love, it was about having the same rights as other couples. We are not asking for special rights, we're asking for equal rights. We want to build our life and live securely in a community that we love, surrounded by the people that we love. I have lived in Idaho since 1992. My wife has lived in Idaho since 1976. In 2008, we were married in California before the state's brief ban on same-sex marriage was enacted. Our marriage was not overturned with Prop 8. They left all of the 30,000 plus couples that were married, they left us married. Our marriage wasn't recognized in the state of Idaho, denying us the basic protections enjoyed by our neighbors, our clients, and our colleagues. In 2013, with the help of attorneys Deborah Ferguson and Craig Durham, we filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho, Latta v. Otter. A federal court ruled in our favor. The federal district court here in Idaho ruled in our favor I want to say November of 2014 or May of 2014 or 2015, no, 14, May of 2014, sorry. And then we went before the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit ruled in our favor as well. And in October of 2014, marriages between same-sex couples began in Idaho. The impact of our marriages was only us, was only on us. It did not impact anybody else in the state. No one else was harmed by our marriage.
Sue, I'm sorry, your time's expired, so you'll need to,
Really? 2 minutes?
yeah.
Wow.
I've let you go a little bit past it, so just kind of bring it to a conclusion here.
Okay. So let me just say in closing, we believe in equality and dignity and liberty. And the only people that are impacted by this memorial are the thousands of couples in Idaho who benefit from marriage equality. And the idea that you would compare the lives of actual people to the lives of dams is kind of offensive. We have fought very hard for these rights, and these rights extend beyond the state. There are federal implications to our ability to be married. So I'll close with that.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Are there questions for Sue? Representative Skog and then Representative Keelys.
So thank you. You testify very well, by the way, and I listened.
My first time.
Great. I listened to every word. You have some experience with the Otter case, correct?
Yes.
Follow up?
Yes,
I'm
certainly.
the named plaintiff.
Thank you. So if Obergefell was overturned, would you not still be protected by the Otter case as was brought up earlier?
I assume that that's true, that the Ninth Circuit Court ruling, that it would fall to the Ninth Circuit Court ruling in which we prevailed. I don't know the process after that. I don't know what's next for Representative Scott.
Okay. Representative Keelys.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Suing the state is no small task. I mean, what made you decide to sue Idaho?
So I have been an advocate of marriage equality for a very long time. My wife and I married in Idaho with no legally binding contract in 2006 in front of 180 of the people that love us the most, and affirmed our commitment to one another. And even without the legal contract of marriage, it felt different. I absolutely believe in the institution of marriage and all of the security that comes with that. What it also brings is financial security, a lot of, like Achilles said, 1,300 different rights that you probably couldn't even list, that are state and federal rights that are conferred to you with the marriage license. So, it was. I believe in the institution of marriage. When we had the opportunity, we were legally married in California. When we had the opportunity to stand up in the state of Idaho and say, we want our marriage recognized in the place where we live, we did that too.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Sue, I talked a little bit about the financial impacts, but from your perspective, what did it cost to live in a state that didn't recognize same-sex marriage?
Sue?
There is an emotional cost to being overtly discriminated against by the state that you live in. There are also financial costs. There are tax benefits, there are rights of survivorship, there's rights of inheritance, there's, state and federal tax benefits. And again, all the various other rights that we don't even understand, right? Like, you don't know until you're faced with not having the opportunity that your neighbors have.
Sue, I got a question for you. You said you believe in the institution of marriage, and this is kind of getting at the heart of who defines it. So do you want the federal government to define it, or would you rather states have that opportunity to define marriage?
I want the Constitution of the United States to define it in the Due Process Clause. I want the same legal protections that everybody else has.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Representative Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sue, when you got married, only a handful of states, including California, where you traveled to get married, I know you mentioned you had a union in Idaho in 2006, right? Only a handful of those states recognized marriage equality at that time. Why would you return to a state as hostile to marriage equality as Idaho in 2008?
Sue?
As I mentioned, I've lived in Idaho for 30 plus years. My wife grew up here and has lived here her whole life. We own a home. My wife has been at her place of business for 40 years and has owned it for 20. And I ask you, how would you feel if you had to move out of the state in the place that you love and had established your life in order to have your marriage recognized?
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Sarah Lawal. State your name, who you represent. You'll have 2 minutes today, Sarah, for public testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Crane, members of the committee. I am the Reverend Sarah Lawal. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister serving the Boise Fellowship. I testify today on behalf of my congregation and the Interfaith Equality Coalition, a broad coalition of faith communities advocating for justice, equity, and compassion. I come before you today in strong opposition to this memorial. Marriage holds a profound spiritual, emotional, and societal significance. It's a covenant of mutual support and commitment, a sacred bond that transcends the boundaries of gender. For Unitarian Universalists, the inherent worth and dignity of every person given by God is not just a belief, it is a sacred value. This principle calls us to affirm and celebrate the love and commitment of all couples, regardless of gender identity or sexual orientation. As a minister, I've had the great privilege of officiating weddings for couples of all genders. I have witnessed how marriage strengthens families, provides stability, and fosters community. The benefits of marriage are not exclusive to opposite-sex couples. They are the God-given birthright of all who enter into this sacred commitment. The teachings of my faith compel me to speak against this bill because it violates core principles of compassion and justice and equality. To use the legislative process to deny some couples the recognition of their marriages is to diminish our collective humanity. As a diverse and pluralistic nation, we honor religious freedom. We allow each faith community to determine its own teachings on marriage, but the civil institution of marriage must remain inclusive and equal, free from discrimination rooted in theological disagreement. This bill not only harms same-sex couples, it sets dangerous precedent of using government authority to impose one narrow religious interpretation of marriage on all people. I urge you to consider the lives and stories of same-sex couples in Idaho who have built loving, committed relationships. They are our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, and members of our faith communities. Their marriages strengthen the social fabric of our state, and their dignity deserves the full protection of the law. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Representative Skog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I missed some of your testimony. You may have answered this question already in your statement, but what, as a theologian, what is your core scripture to support your belief in homosexual marriage?
Our core scripture is that all humans were created in the image of God, and God called creation good.
Follow up? No? Any further questions?
Yes, follow-up.
Oh, follow up? Okay.
Excuse me, what is that scripture?
That's a text from Genesis.
Follow-up?
Follow up?
Could you
Okay.
cite that for me, please?
I can't, I'm sorry.
Any further questions? Reverend, I do have a question because you are a person of faith. Does you kind of picking up where Representative Scott's trying to go and some of the disagreement with her and Representative Keeley's, does your belief is that God created the institution of marriage or that states or governments created the institution of marriage?
Well, I believe governments created the institution of marriage.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any further questions for the Reverend? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Isaac Creighton? Going once, going twice. Jessica Everett? Josh Lee? Josh, welcome to the committee. State your name, who you represent. Well, you'll have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Crane and the members of the committee. I'm Reverend Josh Lee. Recently moved here from New York City to pastor Boise First United Church of Christ. My congregation voted to become affirming of LGBTQ people almost 40 years ago. So before it was even on the national stage for conversation, this church and congregation was advocating for the rights of LGBTQ people. I've always known 3 things to be true about myself. I knew growing up that I loved Jesus, I loved being a pastor, and I loved men. And I had no idea how these 3 things could ever coexist in the world. It took me many years to figure that out. In high school, I went through conversion therapy 3 different times, desperate to try to change myself and pray the gate away. I was afraid that if I couldn't change this part of me, that I would end up in hell. And worst, also, that I wouldn't be able to fulfill my call as a pastor. In college, the largest conversion therapy program in our country, Exodus International, admitted that it was impossible to change one's sexuality, and they closed their doors. I then was forced into celibacy for 5 years and singleness, as I believed that was what was the next response, how to respond to my sexuality. In 2014, when pastoring in Kentucky, I fell into despair, and I began to watch my friends and family get married and have children, and I was realizing that I was going to be denied this and live alone the rest of my life. And this led me to plan my own suicide. Thankfully, my faith was transformed when I met other Christians who believed that gay-affirming theology was true and real. And for the past decade, I have pastored inclusive churches in Chicago as well as in New York City, dedicating my life to ensuring that others do not experience the same hell that I went through. While some Christians focus on saving people from the hell to come, I'm committed to saving people from the hell they live in right now. That's why I am here and my husband moved to Boise from New York City to advocate for the rights of LGBTQ people, even though we have spent our lives living in states where we've never had to do so. Marriage has evolved throughout history from a financial transaction to interracial marriage, and it is a social and legal institution that has adapted to cultural progress. The arguments for traditional marriage completely ignores this evolution over time. Instead of taking the rights away from people, I urge this legislature this morning to focus on the issues that truly impact Idahoans, like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. In my closing statement here, I am not going anywhere, my church isn't going anywhere, and the LGBT community isn't going anywhere. We are a resilient people who have fought for centuries to secure the rights we have, and we will fight like hell to ensure that no one else goes to the hell that we have endured.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Questions?
Are there questions for Reverend Lee? Representative Hostetler.
Thank you.
Welcome. You're awake over there.
Chairman. Thank you. Thank you for stepping up to testify. What is your source, your main book, if you will, for your moral foundation?
Are you asking what passages I look to justify homosexuality in the Bible?
Well, just in general.
So we got to go through the chair here, guys, and especially with hot topic subjects like this, we want to make sure that the emotions stay out of it. So go ahead and make sure that your questions go through the chair. Representative Hostetler.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Do you teach out of a specific book or multiple books in your church or your congregation?
Yes, our church looks to both the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, as well as the New Testament to gain our understanding. We also lean on reason as well as tradition, as we believe all things work together to make sense of the text.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir, please.
Okay.
Where do you get the supremacy in your authority? Is it from reason? Is it from scripture? the Hebrew text, Old Testament, New Testament?
Reverend Lee?
I think the word supremacy is an interesting choice of words there, just because I think that even as a minister myself, I should always come to the text and to my sermons with an openness to realize that I am human. I can see and understand things differently, and I need to evolve and change. And so my hope is that if I sat down with any of you, you might say something that would allow my mind to change and transform, that none of you are more supreme or have a better interpretation than maybe my interpretation as well, but that it's important to be in conversation in order to understand the interpretation.
Mr. Chairman, one more follow-up, please. How do you rectify multiple scriptures that speak against that lifestyle, old and new?
Sure. Yeah, so the biggest argument, is
fine.
that
Go ahead,
fine?
Reverend.
Sorry, Chairman. The biggest argument for that is that the Bible does not specifically speak to, does God bless same-sex and same-gendered marriages. When the Bible speaks about homosexuality throughout Scripture, it seems to be instances of great abuse or excess. For instance, Sodom and Gomorrah, this has nothing to do with same-sex marriage. This is men who literally were group raping this gentleman who came to visit this town. All of the men in the town, it says, showed up in Leviticus. So you're telling me all the men in the town who wanted to brutally rape this man are gay? Probably not. It had nothing to do with homosexuality. It had to do with violence. And we see this to be true throughout Scripture when homosexuality is referenced, that it's not about same gender loving relationships. It's often how sex and sexuality was used for brutalization or over excess, orgies and so forth.
One more follow-up,
so
Mr.
let you
Chairman,
another
if you don't
question.
mind.
Okay. Sure.
Last one, New Testament, when homosexuality specifically is mentioned by Paul in,
Yes.
in multiple books, specifically, as he says, some of you who were formerly this way,
Yes.
or these type of people will not inherit the kingdom, in regards to embracing a lifestyle or a sin now in Christ have come out of that. How have you rectified those sections of Scripture? Is this where you would implement your logic or your reason or emotion? No condensation, or excuse me, I'm not trying to be content.
No, I appreciate your
condescending.
questions.
I'm just curious how you rationalize the black and white Scripture and words of Christ when he refers to marriage in Matthew and these
Absolutely.
types of sections.
And thank you, Chairman. And I appreciate your questions and your genuine curiosity to understand my viewpoints and where they come from. It's the only way I think we're going to understand each other is to ask these questions and have these conversations. So I do appreciate that. So the way that I interpret Scripture, I will recommend a book to you called God and the Gay Christian. This is a book that breaks down the theological arguments for how to interpret certain passages like what you're referring to in the book, and in the New Testament, and particularly in 1 Corinthians and in Romans, the passages you're reflecting on. The summary of what that book would say on these topics is that the word homosexual that is often seen in those lists that you see in the epistles, that this word was actually changed, if you look at the history of this, in the late 1970s and 60s. In many of our translations of the Bible, it was often referred to as sodomites, and this word was changed to homosexual as we continued to create new translations of Scripture that made it easier for people to read in the English. And so this word that has been historically interpreted differently throughout in the Greek, one can interpret it as sodomites, but also that same word homosexual in Scripture can be interpreted differently as older men who were sleeping with younger children. So one would also call that pedophilia. But again, as more translations of the Bible were developed in the mid-1900s and onward, that word changed and evolved in our translations over time.
Thank you. Any further questions for the Reverend? Reverend, thank you, and I agree with you that we need to have these conversations. Sometimes they're uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but it is important. So thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Edward Clark. There has been a note that has been slipped to me that people may not have time coming from another room. I would let those people know. There are plenty of seats in here, so come on in. If I've called your name and you were not in the room, if you come in, let me know. We'll make sure you get a chance to testify. Edward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Edward Clark, and I serve as a policy assistant at Idaho Family Policy Center. We stand in support of House Joint Memorial 1 and thank Representative Scott for bringing it forward. There's a long-standing political philosophy known as the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. This doctrine dictates that if a higher governing authority, such as the United States Supreme Court, acts in a manner which violates God's law or undermines the Constitution, then lesser magistrates, such as the state governments, have an obligation to interpose on behalf of their citizens. In their ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges, the United States Supreme Court acted in a manner which abandoned the law of God and violated the Constitution of the United States of America. The Constitution and the subsequent Bill of Rights aim to protect both the rights of individuals and the authority of states from federal overreach. The original powers of the federal government under the Constitution were largely limited to handling foreign affairs and regulating interstate commerce. By seizing authority that was not delegated to the federal government and altering the definition of marriage in the Obergefell decision, the Supreme Court violated the Constitution. The state of Idaho has an obligation to hold the court accountable. I'll leave you with the challenge of Mr. Matthew Trewhella, foremost modern scholar on the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. Quote, "Only time will tell if America's lesser magistrates, that is, the states, are just putting up a token fight against the perversion of marriage. Will they stand even when the federal dog bites back and presses all to embrace it? Will they join the higher authority in their rebellion against God, or will they do their duty in the sight of God and resist?"
Thank you, Edward. Are there questions for Edward today? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Misty Tolman, I'm going to mess up.
It's fine.
Della Carpini? Close?
Very close.
Close, all right.
Yes.
Yeah, my English teacher would be very disappointed. All right, Misty, state your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Misty Deli Carpini Tolman, and I'm here representing myself. I live in District 20. I never thought I'd have to be fighting for my marriage again. When my wife and I stood before our family promising to love and support each other through everything that life threw at us, we knew that our love was just as real, just as valid, and just as protected as everyone else's. We built a life together here in Idaho, a state that we both love. We love the mountains where we take our kids hiking. We love community and how we come together in times of need. We love the values of hard work and self-reliance that have always defined Idaho. But now I find myself wondering if Idaho still loves us back. Because suddenly politicians who've never met my family think they have the right to decide whether my marriage should exist. They think they have the right to tell my kids that their family isn't real, that the security we've fought to build for them can be taken away with a vote. I think about what this means in practical ways. If something happened to me, would my wife have to fight to be able to make medical decisions? If this law passes, would my kids lose their health insurance? Would our family lose the simple dignity of being recognized for what we are, a family just like any other? But more than the legal consequences, I think about what this message sends to my children. My kids know love when they see it. They know our family is strong and safe and built on the same foundation of every other: love, respect, and commitment. What does it say to them when politicians tell them their family is less than? Idaho is my home, my kids' home, the place where we've raised them to be kind, to work hard, and to do what is right. And what is happening right now is not right. We are not nameless strangers in a political battle. We're your neighbors and your coworkers, the people next to you in the school pickup line. We are families who love each other just like you do. Please don't make my family a casualty of politics. We deserve the same love, dignity, and protection as everyone else. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Misty. Are there questions for Misty? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, Dave. Vaughn Archibald, Rabbi Daniel Fink.
Hi, I'm Vaughn Archibald. I'm a pediatrician here in Boise, Idaho. I stand in opposition of this memorial. As a physician, I stand as an advocate for my patients. I see children, I see their families, and I have the privilege of seeing families that are same-gender parents or mixed-gender parents. And I don't think that their combination of genders of the parents make one marriage or one family stronger or less strong than another. And I feel like this is a grave mistake to go back, take a step backwards and really, I don't know, and let me get back to my notes. I do feel when Representative Scott was addressing this, she kept saying that's not the main issue, but it is the main issue. Giving hypotheticals about dams being taken away or other things, that's not what we're addressing. We're addressing a law that protects people's right to marry. And I see some wonderful families. I'll give you an example. This week I saw a family with 2 moms. They have 3 wonderful children. They're lovely people. In fact, I'd probably put them on the top of my list of wonderful parents. They care for their children. They provide for their children. They come to every appointment. They're so wonderful. Why should they be denied the same rights as the next family I saw half an hour later, who had a man and a woman with 3 wonderful children that also care for their children, that are also lovely, that are also advocating for their children. I also see patients that find attraction towards their same gender. And I worry about those children growing up in a society that tells them they will not be given the same opportunities. There will still be the same amount of gay people tomorrow if we pass this. There will still be the same amount of people that choose to marry someone, or even if it's not legally, or to get together with that person. This is not going to make that go away. It's just going to make those people feel marginalized and not give them the same rights and privileges, which I believe are inherent rights and privileges. I feel like this is a grave mistake and a horrible use of our time and our energy as a government. We should be focusing on children's equal right to receive good medical care and other things, gun control for schools. I mean, there's so much more we could be focusing on. Let's not focus on the fact that 2 guys decide to get married and have a family, or 2 girls. Who cares? What is this going to accomplish other than just take us backwards and make people feel alienated?
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Archibald? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Connie Winter? Just a second, Okay, Connie, go ahead, state your name, who you represent.
Good morning, Chairman Crane and members of the committee. I am Pastor Connie Winter Yulberg, pronouns her and she, and I am from the Interfaith Equality Coalition, but I'm also the pastor of King of Glory Lutheran Church here in Boise. I am here to speak against the resolution. I am a follower of Jesus Christ. Being a follower of Jesus takes prayer and study and scriptures, and more importantly, to do what Jesus said to do, love God and love my neighbors, which is from Matthew 22, verse 39. I believe that God created all people, including my LGBTQIA plus neighbors, as beloved children of God. I believe that having same-sex marriage is an asset to our culture, and because it honors the love and dedication to relationship and the commitment between 2 people. My church feels called by God to have an intentional welcome for all people, but especially LGBTQIA plus folks. I believe that taking away our rights from Idahoans to marry is not what God wants for God's beloved people. Before I was a minister, I worked for the U.S. Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee. I believed in the work that was done to help U.S. citizens, but I totally disagree with this bill because I believe that it hurts Idaho citizens and their family and people that I know in my church. This bill creates fear, anxiety, and lack of safety for LGBTQIA folks and their families. I serve a church that understands the basic needs that are not being met in Idaho. We have 5 programs to feed people, a food pantry, 400 sandwiches made every month for the Boise Rescue Mission, a free meal, a community garden that serves 21 immigrant families, gift cards to dozens of families in need who knock on our door. We have sold a part of our backlot to LEAP so that 8 families can have housing. We have sold another parcel of land. We have sold one before to Veolia, which is our water company here, so they can put in another well to give water to 1,200 more Boise homes. I wish that you could spend more time on things that are allowing the people of Idaho to survive, but not only that, but to thrive. I don't think this bill does either one. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Connie? Connie, thank you for quoting the scripture, book and verse. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Lillian Rauer. Okay. Annalise Humphrey. Okay. Nissa Nagel. Connor Allen. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today.
Hi, hello. My name is Connor Allen. I'm here representing not only myself, but anybody who was unable to be here at this meeting today. Now, I would like to make it very clear before I start speaking that make no mistake, this memorial is about gay marriage. We can sit here all day and debate whether you're talking about states' rights. We can sit here and argue whether or not the Bible truly accepts gay people. But at the end of the day, none of that should matter, because what we are looking at in this meeting is same-sex marriage within the state of Idaho. We have absolutely no reason to be passing this resolution, which was clearly created with the intention of removing that right, or at the very least, changing it to a federal level in which it will so certainly be removed, if not in Idaho,
Connor,
then
let
states.
me just caution you a little bit. You can't impugn the motives of why she brought it. We don't know. So to say that she brought it for a certain reason, you got to be careful, okay?
Okay.
All right.
I apologize
No problem.
for
Just-
making those sorts of statements.
You're fine.
It is my belief that bills such as these are created with the intention of doing so. Now, I believe that when we look at resolutions like these are not things that we should be looking at in terms of what a state's right is, especially not in the eyes of a God. We cannot attempt to debate whether this is the state that gets to choose whether or not marriage is a right to give, or whether it is God who can give the right to marriage. Because at the end of the day, the government and religion are things that were always intended to be kept separate. That is constitutional. So while we can sit here and claim that God is the one who gives us the right to marry, at the end of the day, it should not matter what God says about marriage, because at the end of the day, we are the ones who get to make the decisions about the laws within this country. And the decision that we are attempting to make right now is looking at something such as marriage. Now, what this bill will attempt to do, or not bill, resolution rather than actually creating any sort of legal change, it is going to send a message to every LGBTQ person within the state of Idaho that, if passed, we believe that the Bible is more important than their lives. It sends a message to LGBT children that the state does not care about them, which is something that they have already felt at a much larger governmental level. And I see absolutely no reason why we are even debating this today in the year of 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. Are there questions for Connor? Representative Hostetler.
Did you say that, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Way to just get that out. Most people need notes, myself included.
Yeah.
And it's a very polarizing subject, and a lot of people are passionate on both sides. So I appreciate your passion, and thank you very much for getting that out. Did you say separation between church and state is constitutional?
I did state that. If that was a incorrect notion on my part, then I do apologize. But I do know that, the church and the state are two things that have traditionally been kept separate. I know that we do that, legally. We cannot create laws on the definition of, well, God told me that this is correct.
Representative Hostetler.
Just to follow up, thank you. What do you say to the reality, the vast majority of those who've kind of explored the subject of rights that claim that marriage is a privilege and it's not a right? How would that play into everything for you?
Connor?
Well, I do believe, yes, there are people who are going to have that belief. I do also believe that, one, not everybody is going to hold that belief, that God is the one who can give these rights. I also believe that if this were a matter of heterosexual marriage, we would not be talking about things such as who is able to give these rights, whether it's God or whether it's the state. So I apologize if I am completely misinterpreting your question, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that not everybody believes in God. Not everybody who votes or pays taxes believes in God, and therefore I do not believe that we should be turning to God in a matter of morals and marriage.
Follow up?
No.
Okay. I've got a question then for you, Connor. That was an interesting, that final statement actually spurred a question. So where do you derive moral authority from?
So me personally, I am an atheist, just for, full disclosure's sake. I derive my morals purely from what I believe is going to be good for the greater good of humanity as a whole, right? I don't necessarily believe that there is going to be a higher power watching who tells me what is right and what is wrong. I simply believe if I am doing something that is going to hurt a person, that is something that is wrong. If I'm going to do something that is going to help a person, that is something that is right. And I think that things such as this are only going to hurt people. So if we are looking at this from a moral standpoint, this is not right.
Okay, so how do you, when your moral convictions collide with, say, Representative Keeley's moral convictions, how do we as policymakers determine which moral authority, if his opinion is different than your opinion, how do we decide who actually is right and what has the moral authority to make the final decision?
I think in terms of legislation such as this, because that is a very, very heavy philosophical topic that could be debated it's been debated for centuries upon centuries. But I think in terms of legislation, such as the specific scenario that we are in right now, it is important to listen to the voices of the people, seeing as this is something that is going to affect the people, seeing as majority of government positions were elected by the people. So I think in terms of situations such as legislation, it is very important that we listen to what the constituents and what the citizens of the state are asking for. And based on what I have heard today, the representatives and the citizens of this state are not in support of resolutions like this.
Perfect. Thank you. Representative Hostetler.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So when you have opposing moral high grounds, if you will, from people that don't take, for example, the scripture or God, those things as their foundation, we'd say we just go off sheer number. Is that what you would
I think that is a very tricky situation because if we're going purely off of sheer number, there are a number of things that you could justify that are incredibly morally unjust. But like I said, the way that I determine morality is going to be, things as like harm such versus benefits, right? Is this going to hurt somebody or is this going to, benefit somebody? So I do think that while, of course it's very tricky, we can't go based purely on like, oh, well, I took a poll and a majority of people said that this is okay, so therefore it is okay. I still do think that if we are looking at it at a personal level, morals are something that I determine to be whether it hurts or benefits somebody. I simply stated that, we should be looking towards votes and such in matters such as this because, again, I think it's very, very tricky to sit here and debate how we can define morality, and ultimately that is not really the core of the argument today.
Representative Costello.
Last follow-up question. In a world of atrocities in our past on both sides, hundreds of millions chalked up to really atheistic mindset that believes in what we would call the greater good. Do you think going down this road without a moral foundation can leave us, as one has said, with our feet firmly planted in midair?
Well, I do believe that we can still use a moral foundation to go about this. Like, as I've stated, there's hurt versus harm. And that I would also argue that we can state that the church is responsible for the deaths of thousands upon millions. So we can sit here and say, well, the church did something bad versus atheists did something bad. At the end of the day, humans have done bad things because they are humans. We cannot necessarily blame the fact that they were an atheist or the fact that they belong to the church. If we're going to sit here doing that, then we are going to be here for a very, very long time pointing at every single atrocity and war that has ever happened throughout the history of ever. So at the end of the day, I think if we want to look at this objectively morally, we can look at hurts versus harms. We should not necessarily be looking at what do atheists think versus what do Christians think. Because ultimately, humans have done many good things and humans have done many bad things, and that cannot directly be attributed to either their faith or their lack thereof.
Okay. Follow-up?
One last follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you think our founding documents and our founders and much of the, once again, foundational elements that our nation was built upon was rooted in Judeo-Christian values?
I do believe that the majority of the founding fathers and such were incredibly Christian. I also believe that the majority of the founding fathers believed that slave ownership was completely okay and that it was morally correct to do what they were doing. So I think in situations of morality, while yes, we can look back and we can say, well, the founding fathers were Christian, well, a lot of things have changed since then, and there were a lot of things happening then that we absolutely would not condone now.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions for Connor? Connor, great job.
Thank you.
Next up, let's see. We're trying to bounce around here because some of these folks are not here. Julianne Young. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Julianne Young, and I represent myself today. I speak in support of House Joint Memorial 1 and in defense of my personal faith and belief, which has been criticized today by a committee member and in testimony as inherently hostile and unkind simply because I hold a belief different from theirs. I am a woman. I am a wife. I am a mother of sons and daughters, and I now have the joy of being Nana or Grandma. These inherent identities and roles cut across all societies and cultures and are self-evident in every language throughout all recorded time. The family has existed independent of and prior to government. It is not a creation of the state or nation. As such, it has certain inalienable rights and duties, which must, by virtue of its independent nature and divine origin, be respected and protected. The family is the fundamental unit of society. It is the only foundation upon which a free society may be built, because it brings together the needs and interests of both individuals and the collective in a natural and inherent way that has the wisdom of God stamped on every page. I have reviewed and heartily concur with the dissenting opinion of 4 out of 9 of the Supreme Court justices in Obergefell versus Hodges. This act of sheer judicial hubris, which has purported to redefine and has effectively undefined marriage, which is the mechanism by which families are created, cannot stand the test of time. It is on the wrong side of truth. I believe that the state of Idaho should have the opportunity to choose to align their policy with these timeless truths. I recommend a yes vote on House Joint Memorial 1, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Julianne. Are there questions? Representative Achilles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Young, does the Obergefell decision require that anyone endorse same-sex marriage?
Representative Young, or excuse me, Miss Young.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Achilles, Obergefell required that the states honor and acknowledge same-sex marriage.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That wasn't actually my question. So does it require that you personally endorse same-sex marriage? Does it impinge on your personal liberty?
Ms. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles. As has been pointed out today, what we are really talking about is the positive rights associated with marriage, which some people believe they are entitled to. Those positive rights come at a cost to society at large. And so, by virtue of that fact, I, as a private citizen, am required to endorse and support something that violates my freedom of conscience.
Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Young. Gage, is Gage in the room? Gage? Nope. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience today that would like to testify? We're going to just kind of go through. You in the back, go ahead, come first. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today for public testimony.
So, my name is Isaac Creighton. She called me earlier. I'm testifying in opposition to this bill. Should you choose to vote in favor, you'd be denying many privileges and rights, such as successorship rights, the ability to add spouses onto health care insurance, restricted family visitation rights in hospitals, the ability to sue others should a spouse wrongfully die under Idaho Code 5311.
You're okay. Take your time.
Thank you.
We'll give you the time you need.
And so my health insurance lists that I can only list spouses and immediate children on it. So my partner is currently stuck on Medicaid because we're not legally married yet. The IRS allows inheritance free from taxes. Should your spouse die without having to pay inheritance taxes on anything, banks will provide mortgages easier to married spouses with their combined income in pursuit of the American dream. Should a loved one be detained, quite often detaining facilities will give preferential treatment to immediate family members, which is basically just parents, siblings, kids, again, legal spouses. Moving abroad, should someone become a permanent resident and move in with their spouse in their country, that is predicated on being a legal spouse to someone. Essentially, what Idaho is trying to do here is remove the ability to be married same sex, remove those rights and benefits you get, and essentially impose an unjust tax on people. I'm done.
Okay, all right. Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions?
Thank you,
Representative Hostetler.
Thank you once again. Nicely done. It's tough to get up here. Do you think civil unions address a lot of these financial issues? And if so, or if not, they don't address some of these aspects. Do you think that a process through the legislature to address some of those issues and add on perhaps the financial aspects to civil unions may be a solution to still maintaining the sanctity of marriage that most in our state believe is inherently not only in our Constitution as a man and a woman, but given by God as a union between a man and a woman? Do you think civil unions could be an avenue that would rectify a lot of the issues going on around this debate? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chairman Crane, Representative Hosser, it could be a solution because civil unions and marriage, as far as most things concerned, aren't really all that different. However, with how the state is treating this, I do see it as a potential avenue that they would close the civil partnership as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your testimony today. We're going to start back here in the back. We're going to start over here, and then so we'll catch you in the back, and then we'll catch you up front. Go ahead. Yep. Come forward. Just state your name, who you represent. You'll have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Hi, I'm Lucia Greer, and I am representing myself, and I stand in firm opposition to this bill. This resolution is a foolish idea. Representative Scott argues that this is simply a states' right issue, but in my opinion, the resolution is quite clearly biased against gay marriage in that it claims that making marriage between a man and a woman would be restoring the natural state of marriage. States' rights are often used to preserve bigoted institutions, as Representative Achilles mentioned, and as Representative Morley said, how is restricting freedoms on in a discriminatory way on a state-by-state basis? It's a protection of liberty. There are 2 possible reasons for anyone to claim that a marriage between a man and a woman is natural, either via the belief that homosexuality is inherently unnatural or by appealing to the Bible. Neither of these points are valid. First off, homosexuality has been observed in a wide variety of animal species, and how is that not natural? Also, even if it was unnatural, we do a lot of unnatural things. And so, why would we care if this is unnatural? The Bible argument, freedom of religion means freedom from religion. We can't make laws based on the Bible. It goes against the Constitution. Also, this bill has been very unpopular against the majority of the religious community that has showed up to testify here today. This should never have been considered. I know many happily married gay and lesbian couples, and they are very good people, and this bill wants to make it so that their right to bind themselves together in love, the same as a man and woman, is uncertain depending on where they live.
Okay, you'll need to wrap it up. Your time's up.
I am wrapping it up. Altering these decisions into states' rights does is make it so that queer people such as myself feel unsafe in some areas, and I'd rather feel safe in my birthplace rather than have to flee to California. I expect better from my legislature, and I will be standing for questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. We're going to catch you in the front row, and we'll head to the back row back there. I saw your hand. Yep, I've got you next. Okay, go ahead. Just state your name, who you represent. You have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sharon Fritz, and I'm representing myself. I have been a mental health provider in the state of Idaho for 40 years and a licensed psychologist for the last 30 years. I have worked with many individuals who have identified as gay and have struggled and have helped them struggle with finding a sense of identity, a sense of self-respect and love, a sense of community, belonging, and acceptance. Many of the individuals have had thoughts of suicide, and some of them have died by suicide. The research shows that people who struggle with their sexual identity have higher rates of mental health issues, including depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. Our country is having a mental health crisis right now with more and more people struggling with their mental health, needing mental health services, and having thoughts of suicide. Efforts such as this will only increase the mental health issues for many of our family and our friends. I believe that this resolution will make it worse for these individuals, and they will continue to struggle with their mental health, which impacts their ability to be productive citizens of our state. One experience that stays on my mind and heart is when I was working with a woman whose partner was dying of cancer, and she was unable to be with her partner when her partner died. This distress and pain and heartbreak for this woman will remain with her for the rest of her life. On a personal level, I have been married for 39 years this June, and it breaks my heart and tortures me by the idea that this action will prevent somebody else from spending their life with loved ones and have the joy of their love and family that I've had. I believe that the implication of this resolution is that fellow Idahoans will feel less valued and have less rights than other Idahoans.
I'll need you to wrap it up. Your time's expired.
I hope that this resolution is not passed, and I'm here to provide strong opposition to this action.
Thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you for your question or your testimony today.
Thank you.
In the back, you come on forward. I can't remember your name, but you invited me to a Furby press conference last year. That's how I remember you.
Yes, sir. My name is Eric Geronda. And
Eric.
I'm on the list to
Okay,
testify already.
I find you, Eric. Okay, there you are. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, now, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'm going to sing a quick verse of a song, 15 seconds, and then I'm going to quote some scripture.
Eric, I'd love to hear you sing. Go right ahead.
Do you hear the people singing in the voice of angry men? These are the voices of a people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart equals the beating of a drum, there is a life that will begin when tomorrow comes. Okay, now, also I'm going to quote, I'm a born-again Christian. I've been long-term Idahoan. I've been a born-again Christian for almost 35 years, evangelical Christian for 30. And I take issue with Representative Scott and Representative Hostetler that this marriage thing is all about God's law. Now, Jesus talked about the differences between God's law and people's laws, human laws. Matthew 15:6, he says, for the sake of your traditions, you make void the word of God. And he continues on a little bit in 15:7 in Matthew. He says, these people, they praise me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain, for they teach human commandments as God's law. Now, there are God's laws and there are human laws. Jesus Christ doesn't say a single word about gay marriage in the scriptures. There are no words of Jesus Christ at all that talk about homosexuality. So anything above that, for me, is a human law. And what Jesus talked about the most, besides all the woke stuff he talked about, love your neighbor and all that kind of stuff, he talked about people who use their power to take away freedoms of people in God's name. And that's what is called the Pharisee. That's what the Pharisees did. They used their power to take freedoms away from human beings.
Hey, Eric, your time's up. You'll need to wrap it up.
I'm done.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And just for the edification of the room, it's okay for you to disagree with Representative Hostetler or Representative Skog. They're just asking questions, trying to get to the heart of where some of these are at as well. And that's part of this process. So are there questions for Eric today? And you stayed on pitch, so good job. Representative Hostetler.
Chairman, thank you. Nicely done. Do you think when Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes that he was rebuking them for drawing people away from him being the Messiah and the fulfillment of the covenant back to the law that gave them power and control? Or do you think it's specifically there's a designation between God's law and man's law?
Eric?
I'm trying to understand your reasoning on that. Thank you.
Chairman, again, the Pharisees loved to just bait Jesus Christ. They found all these tiny little rules. They twisted words to try to trick him into being who he was not. Now, I believe that Jesus Christ came here, brought his word to us so that we can twist ourselves into being better human beings. He didn't come for us to twist his words to justify our sin.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to
One
continue.
quick question. Are hats okay in here?
Hats are fine in my
know that-
committee, but we got to be careful about the clapping and stuff. That's not, okay? Because we got to control the emotion, keep the emotion down. Gentleman in the red tie, you're going to go, and then gentleman with the glasses on over there, you'll go next, and then we'll come to the guy in front of you. We'll just kind of work our way around there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Paul Rolig. I live in West Boise in District 15. I urge you to vote no on this memorial. I am a cisgender heterosexual male, married over 50 years to a cisgender heterosexual woman. Together, my wife Nancy and I believe that same-sex marriage is just as good as anyone else's marriage and poses no threat to marriage in general. We are acquainted with high school classmates, college classmates, friends, professional business associates who have same-sex spouses. They are among the good and productive people of the community. Many members of this committee campaign for office espousing freedom and liberty. Yet this memorial seeks to restrict the freedom and liberty of same-sex couples. The memorial claims that today we must continue to be bound by traditional views of marriage, even though our country's traditions barred women from voting or owning property and permitted the enslavement of human beings of African descent. Our country's founders clearly anticipated that traditions would change by providing procedures to amend our Constitution. This memorial also cites religious justification for prohibiting same-sex marriage. This constitutes religious dictatorship, infringing the religious freedom of Idahoans. Furthermore, the Pew Research Center's 2024 Religious Landscape Survey of adults in Idaho found that 49% favor or strongly favor legalized same-sex marriage, compared to only 39% who oppose it or strongly oppose it. Clearly, Idaho voters are ready to accept same-sex marriage, and so should you. Please vote no on HJM 1. Excuse me. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today, and thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
You're
for the
up, sir,
opportunity.
and then the gentleman in the blue shirt, you'll go next. And I thought there was a lady there that wanted to testify. We'll get you. She jumped. Okay, we'll grab you, and then we'll go, and then we'll pick you up. So you'll be third. Okay. All right. We'll get to you if we can. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Apologies for my testimony being on my phone. Couldn't find a printer.
No problem.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and esteemed members of the committee. My name is Koe Luritzen. I am here today representing myself as well as other children of same-sex parents. I am a lifelong Idaho resident. I was born and raised in Haley and graduated from Wood River High School in 2019, and I have a bachelor's degree in political science from Weber State University. I am here today to tell you about my mothers. My mothers, who are current Idaho residents and tax-paying constituents of yours, did a phenomenal job raising me. My mother sat through every terrible school play and elementary Christmas concert. They taught me how to ride a bike, they taught me how to throw a ball, how to drive stick, and how to shave. They also taught me how to be a man who is kind, a man who is patient, and a man who respects those with beliefs that differ from mine. And even when I struggle with those, I can always depend on my parents to remind me of what's right. My parents did everything they could to raise me well. And despite all of that, for a majority of their lives, Idaho law has said that my parents are less than. Idaho law has viewed my family as less than. My parents gave me the last name of my non-biological mother just to ensure she could circumvent any bureaucratic nonsense that could dispute her parentage. I was forced to go through a long and expensive adoption process just so the woman who raised me could legally say she was my mother. Obergefell v. Hodges allows families like mine to exist without the threat of legal harassment or invalidation. And whether or not you think this is a states' rights issue, the truth is that it's a family issue. So I ask that when you consider HJM1, I ask that you set aside any concern over states' rights or your own prejudicial pretenses, and I ask that you think of my family. I will not ask that you understand, embrace, or even accept my family, but I will ask that you show it and others like it the respect they deserve, because my lesbian parents deserve as much respect as any other two people who are trying to live the American dream. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Sir in the blue shirt, you're up. And on deck is here, and then we'll catch you next, okay? And then we're going to hit some virtual testimony. There's a couple that we'd like to catch if we can. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is John Howell. I live in Boise, and I'm here today representing myself, and I should be on the list somewhere. Mr. Chairman, members of the State Affairs Committee, I ask and plead for all members of the committee to vote no on HJM1. I want each of you to think about this joint resolution in terms of its effects on our freedoms, our families, and our future. Why am I against HJM1? First, marriage equality is a fundamental issue tied to love, fairness, and human dignity. It's a basic human right. Denying same-sex couples the right to marry infringes on their dignity and their freedom. Repealing same-sex marriage creates a class of citizens treated as unequal under the law, violating the principles of fairness and justice foundational to democratic societies, including ours. Marriage offers legal protections for couples, including inheritance rights, tax benefits, spousal health care, child custody. Revoking marriage equality would strip these protections from same-sex couples, creating legal chaos and harming couples and families, Idaho families. Marriage equality does not infringe on religious freedom. It enhances all of our freedoms by simply allowing all individuals to marry under civil law. Lastly, marriage equality affirms that love is universal. Repealing it would deny countless couples the right to celebrate and formalize their love, hurting families and causing unnecessary pain and hardship. My view is that government, our government, should protect our freedom to love and to marry whom we choose in the future and not restrict people's ability to build loving, committed relationships. Thank you very much, and I'd be glad to answer any questions, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
John. Are there questions for John? Seeing none, next up.
Thank you.
And you're on deck, okay? Sir in the blue shirt, blue tie, you'll be our final one in person today, and then we'll catch a virtual.
Hi, my name is Marita Kirby, and I represent freedom, I hope. When you ran for office, did you contemplate the reasons? Did you ask, why have I chosen to serve? I'm hoping you chose to serve for everyone. Do you consider both sides when proposing a bill and its possible consequences? Will there be more government? Will there be more lawsuits? Who will it serve? What are my intentions? What am I afraid of? And what would Jesus do? Since 2014, the government has seemed to adopt a black and white perspective on things. But even within white, there are variations. Have you ever tried to match white paint? And when you combine black, you get gray. And we all know there are 50 shades of gray. The laws being passed these 10 years have added more government on individual behaviors and become more punitive in the process. Everything seems to be based strictly on religious views. The point of separation of church and state was to keep religion, emotions, and sentiments out of what is meant for the public as a whole. Think about the rules of investing money. If you let your emotions govern your money decisions, they will be the wrong decisions. The same goes for legislation. Today, this is about same-sex marriage to me, but it could just as easily be about all LGBTQ issues, abortion issues, health issues, schools, vouchers. I would ask you to sit down with the rainbow community, have an open discussion, learn. There are physiological and hormonal reasons for members of the rainbow group. The more knowledge one has, the better.
Mariette, I'm going to have to cut you off. Our time's expired.
Okay.
Can you wrap it up in a couple of sentences here?
Well, yes. Why don't we spend our time dealing with things that deal with all of us? Traffic, for crying out loud, pollution, water, drought. Pretty soon, Mother Nature will take all of these decisions out of our hands.
Okay.
And she is one abused female who can truly get even.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thanks.
testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, you're up today, and then you're on deck. You'll be our final one in person. State your name, who you represent. We'll give you 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Cecilia Vega. I represent myself and my partner of 8 years, as well as any child out there that may be terrified in this climate today where laws that are intended to protect them are being weaponized against them. I'm 45 years old. I grew up in Idaho. I love Boise. I love the state. My partner is 46. She grew up, born and raised in Marsing, a very lovely small town that hasn't been, taken over yet. This state means a lot to us, so much that we want to get married 2026 here. This is where I was born. This is where my mom brought me. This is where my mom, my 84-year-old mother, lives. It's a lot for her to even go to the store, let alone travel to see me get married in another state. I can't tell you how much this means to me. We were going to get married this year, but my partner's daughter is graduating from college. These are everyday things. These are family things. They're normal things, right? There's no difference here. I love my partner. And as much as I want to exalt that from the mountaintops because I love her, it's more important to me to take care of her if something were to happen to me. And my partner is also a cancer survivor, so this is a very real thing that we're dealing with here. If something happens to me, besides the hardship and the pain that she's going to feel because I'm gone, financial hardship would just be adding even more to that. That shouldn't, it's just completely asinine, it's unnecessary, and it's hurtful. I've lived my entire life here as myself, okay? I'm just saying here, they call me a 100-footer. You spot me when I walk in the door. There is no hiding this, And I've gotten stares and glares in this state. And more recently, there's been things said to me in anger and in hate. I've paid my dues here. I've contributed to the greater good, taking care of people with disabilities, mental illness, educating children, as has my partner. We've earned this. Please don't take it away from us.
Thank you. Are there questions? Seeing none, sir, come wrap us up, and then we're going to pick up 1 or 2 virtually, and then we'll wrap this up.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and legislators. My name is Owen Neese. I'm a sophomore from Kuna, Idaho, and I'm here today to share my view on the danger of House Joint Memorial 1. It is unfortunate that today, in a time when we should be moving forward, we are moving backward faster than ever. The fact that Idaho is considering a memorial that will overturn the federal right of same-sex couples to marry and undermine the basic liberties of LGBTQ plus citizens is a direct reflection of our backwards momentum. The United States of America has 23.5 million Americans who are LGBTQ plus, and I'm proud to be a member of that community. Of that figure, I would like to share some disturbing facts with you. In the United States, LGBTQ plus people are 4 times as likely to commit suicide. In the US, an LGBTQ plus person takes their life every 45 seconds. 41% of LGBTQ plus people in the US have considered suicide seriously in the last year. And these numbers are driven by social persecution, as exemplified by HJM1. So I would like to know how this memorial will help those figures. The answer is it won't. This memorial will threaten LGBTQ plus people more, and we will see an even larger rise in mental health decline and suicide rates. If it is about protecting traditional marriage, same-sex people getting married, has no effect on a straight couple's ability to marry, and same-sex marriage was happening long before the time of Christ, and this narrative that marriage is only between a man and a woman. I would like to ask you all an important question. Is being gay a choice? The answer is absolutely not. As a high schooler, as a teenager, as a boy, it has been a hard road to accept the fact that I am gay. In an ideal world, it wouldn't matter. In an ideal world, everyone would realize that being gay is not a choice. As I stand before you, a human being with emotions, a family, a life, and a future, I want you to deeply think about the negative effects this memorial will have on tens of millions of Americans. Our happiness is on the line, our rights are on the line, and our lives are on the line. Thank you for your time, legislators. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you, Owen. Any questions for Owen? Thank you for your testimony today. Catherine Hartley, we're going to try to pick you up remotely. Catherine, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep. State your name, who you represent. You have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Chairman and committee, my name is Catherine Hartley. I'm an attorney for the Pacific Justice Institute, and we applaud the content of this memorial and encourage you to vote in favor of it. As outlined in the memorial, from a constitutional standpoint, it doesn't matter how compelling the arguments may be to extend marriage to include same-sex marriage. You've heard many of those arguments today. The legal argument to make such an extension at the U.S. Supreme Court level is non-existent. Defining marriage is a state issue, as it is not enumerated in our federal constitution. So a state's decision to maintain the meaning of marriage that has existed in every culture throughout human history is not only legal, it makes a lot of practical sense. Different states may absolutely elect to expand the definition of marriage to include something different or to maintain the historic and traditional definition. For example, in 2006, almost 2 decades ago, Idaho voters overwhelmingly approved a state constitutional amendment limiting marriage to exclusively between a man and a woman. And states like Idaho should not be forced to ignore this. Modifying the traditional definition of marriage is a policy goal in search of a constitutional justification. The state legislature should be free to debate all of these things and all of the pros and cons of changing this definition, modifying this definition, without being subject to top-down, overreaching judicial policymaking. We encourage a yes vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartley. Are there questions for Ms. Hartley? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today. Arthur Shaper.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Arthur.
Thank you, Shopper.
Shopper.
My name is Arthur Shopper. I'm the field director for MassResistance, the international pro-family group that makes the difference. On behalf of our activists throughout the beautiful state of Idaho, I want to share my gratitude to Representative Scott and her colleagues for this resolution against Obergefell. The Supreme Court made a decision and imposed a ruling it did not have the right or authority to make. 2 justices weighed in on this decision who had overseen same-sex weddings prior. They were not impartial triers of fact, and they should have recused themselves. United States v. Windsor, a previous Supreme Court ruling clearly established that legislation and marriage issues are not enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, and Obergefell did not address that issue. The 10th Amendment is very germane to this issue. Our constitutional republic is based on common law. All these arguments are germane, but there are other issues that must be addressed that this resolution addresses. Liberty and human dignity are not gifts from the state, but they are rights from God. It is tyranny to suggest otherwise. There is an argument that was made that overturning Obergefell would undermine the marriage of interracial couples. People are born Black, Hispanic, or otherwise. They are not born homosexual. There are numerous testimonies of men and women who have left homosexuality and have entered into natural marriage. There is a great discussion about what the couples want, but there is no discussion about the needs of children. Children need a mother, and a father. This has been demonstrated in considerable research in the last 10 years, and that was ignored by one of the Supreme Court justices in his ruling. Last of all, there is this constant discussion about biblical arguments. Male and female, he created them. Marriage recognized as one man and one woman is throughout the scriptures. Last of all, there has been great uproar about how we need to have these discussions. But Obergefell took away the right and opportunity for the states and the people to have these discussions, and that must be restored. Please support this resolution, and thank you for your courage.
Thank you, Arthur. We do have a question from Representative Achilles. Representative Achilles.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr.
I stand by.
Mr. Shopper, how big is your organization, and where else are you promoting this legislation?
We are an international group, sir, as I stated. We are active in Nigeria, Kenya, as well as the United States and Canada. We are thrilled that our local activists in other states such as North Dakota, Arizona, they attempted in Wyoming, Michigan, have submitted this legislation, and state representatives have taken it up. They are responding to the interests of their constituents and taking a stand against Obergefell, which is their democratic right to do.
Follow-up? Seeing none. Arthur, thank you so much for your testimony. Committee, that completes our testifying today. Representative Scott will give you 5 minutes to wrap up, and then we'll take action today on HJM 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to address a couple issues. Just because the court's made a decision that you like, the Supreme Court, doesn't mean they have the authority to actually make the decision. There's been a lot of talk here about, a lot of talk that should be in committees, but it should be if we were deciding that as a state. The resolution is clearly, it's about federalism, it's about judicial activism, and it's about voters that have lost their voice when the federal government decides. Should decisions be made by federal judges or state governments with our testimony, like a lot of stuff that we heard today? This resolution is not about taking rights from anyone. I've heard that a lot today. And a few argue that this was a waste of time. And time and energy. And I would say this is so worth our time, because what happens when that next issue comes up that the federal government decides to make a decision on or create a new right of? I used the issue of an energy policy from the feds removing a hydroelectrical dam. Well, that's my background, so made sense to me, but you could substitute any decision that a federal government can make that they don't have the authority to make in there, any healthcare decisions that might affect your loved ones, a federal policy that could hurt rural health districts. I just ask you to consider passing this resolution to uphold federalism, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Let's just bring those opinions to the state and discuss them. So that's all I really have.
Thank you, Representative
Thank you.
Scott. You're welcome to return to your seat, and we'll let you answer any questions. Are there questions for Representative Scott? If not, House Joint Memorial 1 is properly before the committee. Representative Crane, 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to send House Joint Memorial 1 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Committee, we have a motion to send House Joint Memorial 1 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Is there discussion on that motion? Representative Achilles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose a substitute motion to hold House Joint Memorial 1 in committee for the following reasons, if you'll let me.
Certainly. Go right ahead.
First of all, I think we've established that this memorial is less about states' rights as it specifically relates to marriage equality. And I think we need to address marriage equality head on. Second, this committee and by extension Idaho taxpayers is spending a lot of time on legislation drafted, as Mr. Shopper admitted, a small Massachusetts organization that is overtly anti-LGBTQ. And I think that manifests itself in the text of the memorial also. It is misleading and misrepresentative in a number of different sections within the text of this. At its core, this memorial claims to promote liberty by stripping liberty away from same-sex couples. The language is imprecise. So much so that the bill writers in Wyoming, with a nearly identical resolution, felt compelled to insert warning labels within the text of that. And there's an example of that in your packets. And then the drafters also never took the time to acknowledge Lotta versus Otter. So the idea that we've already granted same-sex Idaho couples the right to marry a year before Obergefell, that's relevant, should be part of this memorial. Fourth, we know from judges and attorneys that this memorial will have no effect. It's just going to be really tossed in the trash. And fifth, passage of this memorial puts Idaho in direct conflict with the new administration. President Trump's Treasury nominee, Scott Besson, has been married to his husband since 2011, and they're raising 2 kids together. Secretary Besson, who was confirmed yesterday by the Senate Finance Committee, chaired by our own Senator Crapo, will be the highest-ranking gay cabinet officer in the history of the United States. Sixth, we're stating in this memorial that members of Idaho's LGBTQ community aren't worthy of the freedom to jointly own property and pursue happiness. And I think this is really important because, these are the ideals that are held in the very first sentence of Idaho's Constitution, to which we've all sworn an oath. We're declaring that same-sex couples are denied access to hundreds of rights and benefits of opposite-sex couples. And by extension, we're taxing same-sex couples by forcing them to spend tens of thousands of dollars on attorney fees to construct those same set of rights that married couples have. And finally, by making this statement, we're saying that this profound institution of marriage, which represents the highest principles of devotion, of sacrifice, of family, of love, is arbitrarily available to some Idahoans, but not others. And remember, from 1863 to 1959, Idaho prohibited interracial marriage. And today, after 50 years, 10% of marriages are interracial, and Idaho is better for it. And from 2006 to 2014, Idaho restricted marriage to 1 man and 1 woman. And today, after about 10 years, there's about 2% of marriages in the state are same-sex. And as we heard from testifiers today, Idaho is unquestionably better for it. So for all these reasons I've shared, I strongly urge this committee to hold House Joint Memorial 1 in committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on the substitute motion to hold House Joint Memorial 1 in committee? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be against this, obviously. I would just hope that this resolution wouldn't be thrown in the trash. I would hope that it will send a strong message to the judges that we don't appreciate judicial activism, and it is not their job to define rights and laws that it's not their authority to do. And so I disagree, obviously, and I would ask that you would vote no on this motion.
Any further discussion on the substitute motion to hold House Joint Memorial 1 in committee? Seeing none, Secretary, call the roll.
Chairman Crane?
No.
Representative Scott?
No.
Representative Palmer?
No.
Representative Barbieri?
No.
Representative Holtzclaw? Representative Skog?
No.
Representative Alfieri?
No.
Representative Crane, 12.
No.
Representative Boyle? Representative Dygert?
No.
Representative Hostetler?
No.
Representative Mickelson? Representative Pohanka?
No.
Representative Achilles?
Yes.
Representative Morley?
Motion fails 13-2. Committee will now turn to the original motion to send House Joint Memorial 1 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It will be done. Would you like to be recorded as voting no? Representative Achilles and Representative Morley on the record for voting no. Committee, that completes our work for today. We'll stand adjourned.